Hello and welcome back to our Million Part Bible Study. We've been going through Matthew for some time now. We have wrapped, I was going to say season, chapter 5. Finally, we're still in the Sermon on the Mount, but we are shifting direction to a little bit of a different message than we've been going through. Obviously, we have been hearing for the most part that the standard to get into the kingdom was not the Pharisees. It was not the laws that they were pushing on people. The standard was God. And we went through the distinctions there. We went through the text and how it's been misinterpreted by Pharisees over the centuries and centuries before we get to this point in our story. And now we're getting to something a little bit different. And that is, what is the proper behavior for a believer? What's the behavior that God wants from these people that are the believers? And that's the crux of what we learn in chapter 6. Jesus is asking his followers to not follow the example of the Pharisees on their behavior as well as their laws. And throughout chapter 6, not to jump too much ahead, we're going to be going through different examples of how the Pharisaical behavior, the people in that time were behaving that went against God, and what you can do to be more pleasing in order to do your kingdom work and get the praise of God, not the praise of man. And that's the big distinction here. Previously, what we've been seeing is things that were, whether it's praying, whether it's giving, that are designed to get attention from man, not God. And that's the whole point to here. So the first thing that we're going to be going through in our chapter 6 is Matthew 6, verses 1 through 4. And we'll read that out. It's about giving to the needy, giving alms. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you will not have a reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. So, don't you just love the give with your left hand instead of your right? We'll get more into that later. But the first thing that we'll go over here is, in this example, we hear about trumpets. So what's this whole trumpet thing? Remember, we're talking about giving alms, giving to the poor. There are other things that Jewish people at the time would give. There would be the temple. Now that there is a major temple back in Jerusalem, you had to also give to synagogues. So somebody always had their hand out. Somebody was always looking for something. And so if you think about if someone gave enough to synagogue, they would actually accompany that person with trumpets. There's a little bit of a parade. So when you would announce, hey, I'm going to give X amount of dollars over here on Monday, the Pharisees, the followers, would walk with you, and the whole town got to see how much money you were given, because they probably wouldn't have done this for a few bucks. So if you give it all, the right amount, they'll go and you get to strut downtown with everybody watching, saying, oh, wow, look, how much he's given. And you can imagine somebody doing this all the time. You get used to it. Oh, here's old Joe Blow, going back to the temple with more trumpets. What a guy. Some people would say at this time that they're not giving to the poor as much as they're paying to get attention. And I've been in a lot of temples like this. I used to belong to one of the biggest temples in the United States. And boy, was it like this. They would put plaques and names. If you gave enough money, you could have your building, your name on the building. Or part of a young adults group, and the woman who de facto became the leader was the one whose father was the architect, designed the whole place. So when she had an idea, it really seemed like it got pushed a little bit more than if somebody was just paying their, I think the minimum was about $185 a month. So some of these temples go pretty far. If you're just giving that 185, you're a bum. You don't get to have too much pull there. What this does, though, is it doesn't make you say, "Oh, I want to help the poor more." It's more like, I want to get that attention for myself. You can imagine that the lack of trumpets was just as deafening. If you saw somebody who never ever had the trumpets, you'd be thinking to yourself, "Oh, wow, he is stingy." If he was wealthy, you'd be thinking it even more. Maybe if somebody was very poor, you wouldn't be thinking that, but it almost pressured everybody else. And this was designed for the approval of man, not the approval of God. And it was really your routine. Think about if you go to church on Sunday and your pastor, collection time comes, and he says, "All right, I'm going to watch everybody put their money into this. And if they can get $20, we're going to blow this horn." Could you imagine the shame if you came there with $5 or $10 and everybody's getting that trumpet and then it's your turn? You'd almost want to go run out to the ATM. So it was very manipulative and very problematic. The other thing, other than this ego trip thing that we're talking about, is that the Pharisees were pretty much the magistrates. They're following a Jewish law at this time. So if you wanted to get a divorce, we went over all the excuses for divorce. Probably some of those happened because some rich guy wanted a divorce. That's probably, you remember when we mentioned that not having your husband's soup was worthy of divorce, and that would be a legal reason. Now, I'm just hypothesizing here, but that might have been a really rich guy who went to the Pharisees and said, "Man, you better make up an excuse. I know she hasn't cheated. I know she hasn't done any of these things, but boy, you better get one, or we're not going to be sending any more of those horn walk donations over to you." So it was a great way to get out of trouble later on. If you had built up this good rapport with your Pharisees, then it would be easy to get out of trouble if you happen to need it. So it's something like a political donation as well as an attention-seeking one. Once again, has nothing to do with God. We've gone miles away from God. The whole thing here is that God cares what's inside of you, the motives that are inside of you. Doesn't care how you're coming off to people. You could fool everybody else, but what Jesus is saying here is that you're not going to fool God. He's going to know why you're doing these things. And that's why Jesus asks you to give these things in complete anonymity, in a way that your left hand wouldn't know what your right hand was given. And it's funny when you think about that, because we all have our ways of doing it. I know I'm guilty of this at different times. So without even doing a humble brag, because you'll see it, there's so many ways in our language that we're able to do these brags of what you've done. But, I gave, let's say, a nickel to a homeless man a few weeks back. And I'm sitting there and my wife says, "Where'd you go? Where'd you go?" We were over at a restaurant. "You just walked away?" And I said, "Yeah, I want to help this guy. I sorry, I wanted to help him." And it starts eating at me. And I said, "Man, it would be nice if she knew." She'll think I'm a really good person if I tell her. So, she's pretty accepting. She trusts me. So she drops it. I wanted her to demand, grab my collar and say, tell me where you were and what you did. But she's not going that route. So, 30 minutes later, it's eating at me, and I go, "Okay, you really wanted me to tell you what I did?" She didn't care, but I needed to get it out, and it's something that works. Sometimes you're good with it, sometimes you're bad, but it's so hard to do something good and then just accept that that's for God, because you really do ruin it the second you bring other people into it, and the second you start looking for praise. You see this all the time. People coming, oh yeah, this guy, I gave him this and that, and just thank God though, right? But it's really, really deceptive, or that we're capable of those kind of things. I heard somebody in church the other day who said, "Oh man, it takes so long to get big checks through the account. I made something last week and it still hasn't cleared." We have so many sneaky ways of doing it, but if you're really following what Jesus said, you just forget about it. The second they say, before it even reaches the a little box that you put it in, just forget about it. God's all, that's all that matters here. Have you ever been to a church or a synagogue where you saw plaques where people had their things in the aisle, or those kind of things? I think even church owners now, they do know. So when you give, it's not anonymous to them. So it's very important for them to consciously think about this and not judge people differently. If somebody's given thousands and thousands of dollars, it's amazing how many times they end up on the elder board, right? Just through that. And I think when you owe it to your pastors and your church owners, if you see this, to bring it up in a kind way, because I think an honest one would realize it's so natural. You're just inclined to go that route, and maybe it will be a wake-up call for them, and they could change that behavior, because it's very hard to break away. If somebody's giving a lot of money, you try to please them. If somebody isn't, you're more willing to look over them in a different way. So it gets tough. And if you don't do these things, if you want your trumpets and you're telling people this and you're reminding people of everything you're doing, you're really fostering the same hypocrisy as the Pharisees. And that's what chapter 6 is all about. So this one was about giving. We'll get into some other things, including prayers, in the next one, and we'll keep rolling. But yeah, thank you very much for coming for this one. We're getting through it. Only 20 something more chapters to go, but we're breezing through it. Thank you very much for coming. Like, subscribe, comment, share all the time. Hope you guys are enjoying the shorts too. You should check it out. We're doing 66 little ones, under a minute, where we break down an entire chapter in 60 seconds or less. So you can get through your entire Bible in 66 minutes. It's a pretty cool idea. So make sure to check out that playlist too when you're not looking for the long form stuff. And hopefully eventually we'll get into a deep dive on every single one of those chapters. But thanks again. Have a great day. God bless.